God says, stop right where you are. Everything I had planned for you has changed. Not cancelled. Changed. Read that again, slowly, because it means something different than what you first assumed. You felt something the moment you opened this. A pull. A pause. That was not random. That was recognition. For a long time, you had a picture in your head of how your life was supposed to go. A timeline. A version of yourself you expected to become by now. And it hasn't happened the way you thought it would. That has left you quietly wondering if you missed something, if you took a wrong turn somewhere and lost the path entirely. You did not miss anything. The plan changed, not because you failed, but because the first version of it was never big enough for what is actually coming. Archangel Michael says, I need you to hear this clearly before the noise of today swallows it. What was written for you originally has been rewritten. Not smaller. Not later out of punishment. Rewritten because you have become someone the original plan could no longer hold. Think about the version of you from a few years ago. Think about what that version wanted, prayed for, begged for some nights when no one else was awake to hear it. Some of it never came. And you have carried quiet grief over that, even if you never said it out loud to anyone. Here is the truth underneath that grief. Some of what you asked for was too small for where you are actually headed. It had to be withheld, not because you didn't deserve it, but because receiving it would have kept you from something larger still waiting for you. You are not being punished by delay. You are being repositioned by it. There is a specific reason this message found you today, at this exact hour, in this exact mood you're currently sitting in. You were not scrolling randomly. Something in you was already searching for exactly this, even if you couldn't have named it a minute ago. Archangel Michael says, the changes coming toward you will not always look like blessings at first. Some will look like closed doors. Some will look like losses. Some will look, in the moment, like the very thing you feared most finally happening. Do not judge them by their first appearance. Judge them by what they eventually make room for. You have been standing at a door for a while now, unsure whether to knock, unsure whether it's even the right door. Stop asking whether it's right. Start asking whether you are willing to find out. Certainty was never going to arrive before you moved. It arrives afterward, built from the evidence of having actually stepped through. Consider what you have been quietly bracing yourself against. The disappointment you keep rehearsing in your mind before it has even happened. The rejection you keep preparing for as if preparing for it will make it hurt less if it comes. That bracing costs you more than the disappointment itself ever would. Let it go, even for today. God says, I see the specific thing you have not told anyone. The thing you carry alone, dressed up in smaller words when people ask how you're doing. You do not have to carry it alone anymore. Not because I am about to remove it from you entirely and instantly, but because you were never meant to carry it without support in the first place. Think about who you have been protecting by staying silent. Often it is not the other person. It is yourself, protected from the vulnerability of finally being seen clearly. Consider what it would cost you to let one person in today, honestly, without the polished version you usually offer. There is a plan forming right now that you cannot see the shape of yet. It involves people you haven't met, doors you haven't reached, and versions of yourself you haven't grown into. That is exactly why it doesn't look the way you expected. You were picturing a plan sized to who you were. The actual plan is sized to who you are becoming. Archangel Michael says, stop measuring your progress against people who started at a different point than you did. Their conditions were never yours. Their timeline was never yours. What looks like them moving faster is often simply them starting closer to where they needed to be. You are not behind. You are exactly where your specific path required you to be at this exact moment. You have wondered, more than once, if you are being forgotten. If the thing you asked for years ago simply got lost somewhere between you and whatever answers your prayers. Nothing gets lost. Every request you have ever whispered has been received exactly as you sent it. The answer has not been silence. The answer has been not yet, spoken so quietly you mistook it for nothing at all. Here is something that needs to be said plainly. Fear has been running your decisions more than you'd like to admit. Not loudly. Quietly, in the background, steering you away from things that actually mattered toward things that only felt safer. Today, notice one decision you are about to make out of fear rather than out of genuine desire. Just notice it. That noticing alone begins to loosen its grip. God says, the version of your life you are afraid of is not the one coming. The one coming looks nothing like your fear's favorite story about you. Your fear has been narrating a future based on your worst moments. I am not working from that story. I am working from what you are capable of, which is considerably more than your fear has ever given you credit for. Consider the last time something ended and you assumed, in that exact moment, that it meant everything was over. Think about what actually happened afterward. Chances are, something eventually grew in that exact space that would never have existed if the ending hadn't happened first. That pattern has repeated in your life more times than you've consciously tracked. It is repeating again right now, in whatever ending you are currently grieving. Archangel Michael says, grief and forward motion are not opposites. You are allowed to mourn what didn't happen the way you hoped, while still walking toward what is coming next. You do not have to finish grieving before you're allowed to hope again. Both can exist in the same day, sometimes in the same hour. There is someone in your life right now whose presence you have been taking for granted, assuming they will simply always be there in the background of your life. Consider reaching out to them today, plainly, without waiting for a special occasion to justify it. Time moves in ways that are easy to forget until it's too late to say the thing you meant to say. You have also been avoiding a conversation with yourself, not with anyone else. A quiet, honest accounting of where you actually stand right now, separate from how you present yourself to others. Consider sitting with that conversation today, even briefly. Avoidance does not make the truth smaller. It only postpones the moment you finally have to face it, usually at a less convenient time than now. God says, the plan that has changed for you includes a version of yourself that no longer needs external approval to feel steady. That has been one of the quiet costs of the old plan, the constant checking of how you're being perceived before deciding how you feel about yourself. The new plan asks you to build that steadiness from the inside, starting today, imperfectly, one honest decision at a time. Think about a moment recently where you shrank yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Where you softened an opinion, swallowed a boundary, apologized for taking up space you had every right to occupy. That pattern, repeated enough times, quietly erodes something in a person. Consider where you might stop shrinking, even slightly, starting with something small today. Archangel Michael says, the timing of everything ahead has already been considered carefully, even the parts that feel painfully slow from where you're standing. Nothing arriving late is arriving by accident. Everything is being sequenced so that what comes first prepares you for what comes after, in an order that only makes sense once you're standing on the other side of it looking back. You have likely noticed subtle shifts recently that you dismissed as coincidence. A conversation that seemed to arrive at exactly the right moment. A thought that surfaced with unusual clarity. A door that opened after you had almost stopped knocking. These are not coincidences. Pay closer attention to them going forward. They tend to cluster right before a significant shift becomes visible. God says, you are allowed to want things you haven't told anyone about, even things that feel embarrassingly large for where you currently stand. Wanting something is not the same as demanding it be handed to you without effort. It is simply honesty about the direction your life is quietly pulling toward. Stop minimizing your own wanting to make it more comfortable for people around you to hear. Consider what you have been calling patience when it has actually started to become avoidance. There is a real difference between waiting faithfully for the right conditions and simply refusing to move because moving feels frightening. Be honest with yourself about which one has actually been happening in your life lately. Archangel Michael says, the fear you feel about the next step is not a sign you should stop. It is a sign the step actually matters. Fear rarely bothers showing up for things that don't. Let the fear ride along if it insists on coming. Just don't let it hold the steering wheel. There is a version of today where you do the one honest thing you have been postponing, and a version where you postpone it once more, telling yourself tomorrow will somehow be easier. Tomorrow rarely arrives easier on its own. It arrives easier only because today's version of you finally did the hard thing and changed what tomorrow was working with. God says, everything that has been rearranged for you was rearranged with care, not carelessness. Even the parts that felt like they came without warning, without explanation, without the courtesy of preparing you first. Especially those parts. The plan was never abandoned. It was upgraded, and upgrades rarely feel comfortable in the moment they're installed. Think about what you would do differently today if you genuinely believed everything ahead was already working in your favor, rather than quietly stacked against you the way it has felt lately. Consider acting, at least for today, as though that belief were already true. Not blind optimism. A deliberate choice to move as if the outcome you're hoping for is actually possible, because it is. Archangel Michael says, stop waiting for every condition to be perfect before you begin whatever it is you've been circling. Perfect conditions are a myth used, often unconsciously, to justify staying exactly where you already are. Begin with the conditions you actually have. They are enough for a first step, even if they aren't enough for the whole journey yet. You have carried more than most people around you will ever fully understand, quietly, without asking for recognition. That invisibility has sometimes felt like proof that no one notices, that the effort goes unseen and uncounted. It has been seen. Every bit of it. The recognition you have been missing from other people is not the same as being unseen entirely. God says, today is a good day to stop apologizing for how long healing has taken you. Healing does not follow a schedule that other people get to set for you. It follows the actual depth of what was broken, and some breaks take longer to mend than others, regardless of how impatient the people around you have become watching you take your time. Consider the story you tell yourself about why good things haven't happened yet. Notice whether that story blames you unfairly, framing delay as personal failure rather than as timing beyond your control. Consider rewriting that story slightly today, not into false positivity, but into something closer to the actual truth, which is usually kinder than the version fear has been telling you. Archangel Michael says, "The people who are meant to walk beside you through what's coming have not all arrived yet. Some are still finishing their own preparation, just as you are finishing yours. Their delay is not evidence they were never coming. It is evidence that timing matters on both sides of every meaningful connection, not just yours." You have wondered whether you are strong enough for what's ahead, given how depleted you already feel from what's behind you. Strength is not a fixed resource you either have enough of or don't. It rebuilds, specifically through the process of facing things, even imperfectly, even exhausted. You will be stronger by the time you need to be than you are right now, precisely because of what today asks of you. God says, "Everything I had planned for you has changed, and that change is not a subtraction. It is an expansion you cannot yet fully picture from where you're standing. Trust the process even in the parts you cannot see clearly yet. Especially in those parts." If this message found you today, believe that it found you for a reason, not by random chance. Comment below if you believe your plan is changing for the better. Send this to someone who needs to hear it before today ends. Thank you for staying until the very last word. One honest step today is enough. You do not need the whole path illuminated. You only need the next step, and that step has already been placed in front of you, waiting for you to actually take it. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from holding everything together for other people while quietly falling apart in private. If that describes any part of your life right now, hear this clearly. You are allowed to stop performing strength for an audience that mostly assumes you're fine because you've never told them otherwise. Letting the mask slip, even briefly, with someone safe, is not weakness. It is the beginning of actually being known. Archangel Michael says, "Notice the difference between the voice that challenges you toward growth and the voice that simply shames you into smallness." Growth-oriented challenge feels uncomfortable but ultimately clarifying. Shame feels heavy, circular, and offers no actual path forward, only judgment. When you notice the second voice speaking, recognize it for what it is, and decline to let it steer today's decisions. Think about the last time you extended someone else grace for a mistake far larger than anything you've ever forgiven yourself for making. Consider what it would mean to extend that same grace inward, starting today, toward whatever version of yourself you've been quietly punishing for something that happened long ago. God says, "The plan ahead includes seasons of rest you have not yet learned how to accept without guilt." Rest is not the opposite of progress. It is one of the conditions progress actually requires, especially after the kind of season you have just come through. Let yourself rest without immediately calculating whether you've earned it yet. Consider what would happen if you stopped trying to control every variable in a situation that was never fully yours to control in the first place. Some of what troubles you most right now is not actually your responsibility to solve. Notice where you've quietly taken on weight that was never yours to carry, and consider setting a small piece of it down today. Archangel Michael says, "The doors closing around you right now are closing on purpose, not by accident and not as punishment." Some of what is ending needed to end before what's coming could actually arrive. Grieve the ending if you need to. Just don't mistake it for evidence that something has gone wrong. You have likely underestimated how much has already changed in you over the last year, focusing instead on everything that still feels unresolved. Consider, honestly, who you were exactly 1 year ago today, and notice the distance between that version and who you are right now. That distance is real, even on days it doesn't feel like enough. God says, your life is not falling apart. It is being rearranged into a shape you cannot yet recognize because you're still standing too close to see it clearly. Give it time. Give yourself grace during the rearranging. The discomfort you feel right now is not a sign of failure. It is simply what change feels like while it's happening, before it has finished becoming whatever it's going to become. If you have made it this far, something in you was genuinely searching for this today, not passing time idly. Trust that search. Let it lead you toward the one honest thing you know you need to do next. Everything else can wait. That one thing cannot. Your life is about to change, not because of luck, and not because of anything you have to force into happening through sheer will alone. It is changing because the plan was never finished with you yet, and it still isn't. Keep walking. The next part is already being written. Archangel Michael says, there is a question you have been afraid to ask, even quietly to yourself, because you were afraid of what the honest answer might mean for how you'd have to live afterward. Asking it does not obligate you to act on the answer immediately. It simply gives you the truth to work with, instead of the vague unease you've been carrying instead. Ask it today, even if only in the privacy of your own mind. Think about how much energy you have spent trying to be understood by people who were never actually going to make the effort to understand you. That energy is not renewable in unlimited supply. Consider redirecting it toward the smaller number of people who have already shown you, through their actions rather than their words, that they are willing to meet you halfway. God says, the version of success you were taught to chase early in life may not be the version that was ever meant for you specifically. Some people spend years pursuing a finish line someone else drew for them, only to arrive and find it empty of the meaning they expected. Consider, honestly, whether the goals you're currently working toward are actually yours, or whether they were simply inherited without question from people whose approval you were trying to earn. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people constantly, while still feeling fundamentally unseen by all of them. If that describes any part of your life right now, know that this loneliness is common enough to have a name, even if no one around you has ever said it out loud to you directly. You are not uniquely broken for feeling it. You are simply human, in a specific and painful way that a great many people quietly share. Archangel Michael says, forgiveness is often misunderstood as something you do for the other person, as a gift you hand over to someone who may not have even asked for it or earned it. Consider instead that forgiveness is primarily something you do for yourself, a way of finally setting down a weight that has been slowing you specifically, regardless of whether the other person ever acknowledges what they did. You have likely noticed a pattern of attracting similar difficulties across different seasons of your life, different people, different circumstances, but somehow the same underlying shape of struggle. Patterns like that are rarely coincidental. They tend to point toward something specific still waiting to be learned, something that keeps repeating precisely because the lesson embedded in it hasn't fully landed yet. Consider, gently, what that lesson might actually be. God says, the plan ahead requires you to release a version of control you have been quietly clinging to, believing that if you just manage every detail carefully enough, nothing will go wrong. Some things were never meant to be controlled that tightly. Loose. Easing your grip is not the same as giving up. It is making room for something to unfold that your tight control was actually preventing from happening. Consider what it would mean to trust your own judgment again, after a season where you second-guessed nearly every decision you made. That season taught you caution, which has value. But caution taken too far becomes paralysis, and paralysis has its own costs that are easy to underestimate because they're quieter than the costs of a visible mistake. Archangel Michael says, "The timing of your breakthrough has already been set, even though you cannot see the date from where you're standing. Rushing it does not move it closer. It only exhausts you unnecessarily in the space before it arrives." Consider what it would look like to prepare steadily instead of straining anxiously, using the waiting itself as part of the preparation rather than treating it as wasted time. There is a version of you a few years from now who will look back at this exact season and recognize it as the turning point, even though right now it simply feels like difficulty without a clear destination. That future version has perspective you don't have yet. Borrow a little of that perspective today. Trust that this season means more than it currently appears to mean. God says, "You have been carrying guilt over decisions you made with the information you had at the time, judging them now with information you only gained afterward. That is not a fair standard to hold yourself to. The version of you who made those decisions did the best they could with what they knew then. Release the guilt that comes from judging the past with knowledge the past didn't have access to. Consider the specific relationships in your life that have quietly become one-sided, where you give consistently and receive far less in return. Notice them without immediately deciding what to do about them. Simply noticing honestly is often the first step toward eventually rebalancing what has drifted out of balance. Archangel Michael says, "The doubts you feel about your own worth were not always yours originally. Many of them were handed to you by people who had no business shaping how you saw yourself, people whose own wounds spoke louder than their wisdom when they were raising you or influencing you early on. Consider which of your doubts are genuinely yours, examined and chosen, and which were simply inherited without your consent. You have been waiting for a feeling of complete readiness before making a significant change, a feeling that keeps receding the closer you get to it. That feeling was never going to arrive in full before you moved. It builds gradually, through the evidence of small steps already taken, not through waiting passively for certainty to arrive first. God says, everything that feels unfinished in your life right now is exactly that, unfinished, not abandoned. There is a difference between a project paused and a project cancelled. What you are living through is a pause, not a cancellation, regardless of how permanent it currently feels from the middle of it. Consider what you would tell a close friend if they described to you, in detail, everything you are currently going through. Notice whether the compassion you would offer them so easily is compassion you have been withholding from yourself. Extend it inward today, at least once, deliberately. Archangel Michael says, "The strength required for what's coming is being built right now, in the exact difficulty you are currently walking through, even though it does not feel like strength while it's happening. It feels like struggle. Strength and struggle are not opposites. Struggle, survived honestly, is frequently where strength actually comes from. There is a specific fear that has quietly shaped more of your major decisions than you have ever fully acknowledged, even to yourself. Naming that fear precisely, rather than letting it operate vaguely in the background, tends to loosen its influence considerably. Consider naming it today, plainly, even if only in private. God says, you are allowed to change your mind about a direction you have been committed to for a long time, even if changing course means admitting that time and effort were spent on something that no longer fits who you have become. That admission is not failure. It is growth, functioning exactly as it should. Consider the last time you truly rested, without one eye still on your phone, one part of your mind still calculating what you should be doing instead. Genuine rest has become rare for you, and its absence has costs that accumulate quietly over time, often unnoticed until they finally demand attention all at once. Archangel Michael says, the isolation you have felt during this season was never the plan's final intention. It was a temporary condition, necessary for a specific kind of internal work that tends to happen more clearly in solitude. Connection is returning. Do not mistake this season's necessary quiet for a permanent state. You have likely questioned whether you are on the right path at all, given how much resistance you have encountered along the way. Resistance is not always a sign of the wrong path. Sometimes it is simply the friction that comes with any path worth walking, the kind that would exist regardless of which direction you had chosen. God says, everything you have survived up to this point has been quietly building a version of you capable of handling what comes next, a version stronger and steadier than the one who began this particular chapter. You may not feel that strength yet. It is there, tested and confirmed by everything you have already come through. Consider what it would mean to stop treating your current circumstances as a verdict on your worth, and start treating them as simply your current circumstances, temporary and subject to change like everything else has always eventually been. Archangel Michael says, the plan changing does not mean the original hope was wrong to have. It means the hope is being fulfilled in a form larger than the one you originally imagined, one that required this exact detour to become possible at all. If this reached you today, believe it reached you exactly when it needed to. Comment below if you feel your season is shifting. Share this with someone quietly carrying more than they've said out loud. Thank you for staying until this very last line. Your plan has changed. That is not loss. That is the beginning of something the earlier version of the plan was never large enough to hold. Walk forward. It is already unfolding. God says, there is a version of gratitude that only appears once everything has resolved comfortably, and a harder, rarer version that appears in the middle of things still unresolved. The second kind matters more, not because it denies difficulty, but because it insists on finding something worth thanking even while the difficulty is still ongoing. Consider practicing that harder version today, even briefly, even imperfectly. Think about the specific moment, at some point in your life, when you decided something about yourself that was never actually true, but that you have quietly organized your choices around ever since. Maybe it was a moment of rejection you turned into a permanent verdict. Maybe it was a mistake you turned into an identity. Consider revisiting that moment today with the more accurate eyes you have now, rather than the frightened eyes you had then. Archangel Michael says, the people who eventually walk alongside you through what's coming will not require you to perform a version of yourself that isn't real. That has likely been part of the exhaustion of certain relationships you've carried, the constant performance required to remain acceptable to people who were never going to accept the unpolished version anyway. Release your grip on those relationships, gently, and make room for ones that don't require the performance at all. You have carried a private hope for a long time that you have never said out loud to anyone, partly out of fear that saying it would somehow make its failure more official, more painful, more real. Consider speaking it, quietly, to yourself first, and then, when you're ready, to one other person. Hopes carried entirely in silence tend to wither faster than hopes given room to breathe. God says, everything that has felt like waiting has actually been working, quietly, beneath the surface where you couldn't see it directly. Roots grow before anything visible appears above the ground. You have been in the root stage longer than felt comfortable. The visible stage is closer than it feels from where you're standing right now. Consider what specific belief about yourself, if you finally let it go today, would change the most about how you move through the rest of this year. Not a vague belief. A specific one, the kind you could actually name if you sat with the question honestly for a few minutes instead of rushing past it. Archangel Michael says, the exhaustion you feel is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is often a sign that you have been doing something right for longer than anyone around you has properly acknowledged. Real growth is tiring in ways that avoidance never is. Let the exhaustion be evidence of effort rather than evidence of failure. There is a specific kindness you have been waiting to receive from someone else that you have never fully offered yourself. Consider what it would look like to offer it to yourself today, without waiting any longer for someone else to arrive and give you permission to feel it. God says, the timing that feels unbearably slow to you is not slow from where the whole plan is being considered. What feels like years to you may be a single necessary breath in the larger shape of what is unfolding. That does not make the waiting easy. It makes the waiting meaningful, which is different, and matters more than it might seem to matter right now. Consider the last time you assumed the worst about a situation before you had enough information to actually know how it would turn out. Notice how often that pattern has repeated, and consider, gently, choosing a different assumption today, not blind optimism, simply openness to an outcome you haven't yet ruled out unfairly. Archangel Michael says, you have been given more resilience than you currently give yourself credit for, built specifically through the very difficulties you wish you had never had to face. Wishing away the difficulty would also mean wishing away the resilience it built in you. Consider holding both truths at once, the pain of what happened and the strength it left behind. You have likely spent considerable energy trying to convince certain people that you deserve better treatment than they have been offering you. That energy, spent repeatedly without lasting change, tends to become its own kind of exhaustion. Consider redirecting it instead towards simply removing yourself from situations that require constant convincing in the first place. God says, the plan ahead includes moments of genuine joy that you may have stopped expecting after a long enough season of difficulty. Joy has not been cancelled. It has been delayed, and delayed joy, once it finally arrives, often lands with more depth than joy that came easily and without the wait. Consider what it would mean to stop bracing for the next disappointment before it has even shown any sign of arriving. That bracing, held constantly, prevents you from fully experiencing the good that is actually present right now, in this exact day, whether or not tomorrow brings more difficulty. Archangel Michael says, the specific prayer you stopped praying because it felt too painful to keep asking is not forgotten simply because you stopped voicing it. Consider picking it back up today, even quietly, even without the same intensity you once brought to it. Some prayers are answered long after the person praying them has quietly given up expecting a response. There is a season coming where you will need less convincing to believe good things are possible for you, because you will have enough evidence by then to simply know it instead of hoping it. You are not there yet. That is fine. Evidence accumulates gradually, and you are further along in collecting it than you currently realize. God says, everything I had planned for you has changed, and the change is not a subtraction from what you hoped for. It is an expansion built specifically from everything you have already survived, everything you have already learned, and everything you are still becoming. Trust what you cannot yet see. It has already begun. If this reached you today, know that nothing about its timing was accidental. Comment below if you feel something shifting in you right now. Send this to someone who needs exactly these words today. Thank you for staying until this very last line, and for trusting that it was worth reading all the way through. Your plan has changed. Walk forward with what you now know. Archangel Michael says, one more thing before you go. Do not let this feeling fade the moment ordinary life resumes in a few minutes. Write down the one sentence that mattered most to you here, in your own words, somewhere you will actually see it again tomorrow. Words read once are easy to forget by evening. Words written in your own hand tend to stay. Consider, honestly, what you are most afraid will never change, the thing that has felt permanent for so long that you stopped believing it could ever be different. Nothing you are currently facing is as permanent as it feels right now, in the middle of it. Seasons end. Even the ones that convince you they never will. God says, you were not given this exact life by accident, with all its specific difficulty and specific timing. It was shaped, deliberately, to prepare you for something you cannot yet see clearly. That does not make the difficulty painless. It makes it purposeful, which changes how it feels to carry, even if it does not change its weight. Think about what you would attempt today if you were genuinely convinced that failure would not define you, that trying and falling short would simply be information rather than verdict. Consider attempting that thing anyway, today, with the fear still present but no longer in charge of the decision. Archangel Michael says, the plan was never about arriving at a single finished destination and stopping there. It is about who you keep becoming along the way, through every version of the plan, changed and rewritten as many times as it needs to be. This is not the final rewrite. It is simply the current one, exactly right for exactly now. Your life is about to change. Not someday. Starting with what you do in the next hour. One honest step. That is all today requires of you. God says, one final word before this ends. Whatever fear tried to whisper to you while you read this, whatever doubt tried to convince you these words weren't really about your life, set it down now. This reached you today for a reason you may not fully understand yet, and you do not need to understand it completely to let it change something in you. Archangel Michael says, walk out of this moment differently than you walked into it. Not perfectly. Not with every answer suddenly clear. Just slightly steadier, slightly more willing to trust the process still unfolding around you, slightly more ready for what comes next. The plan has changed. It was always going to. Trust it. Consider, one last time, what you were carrying when you first opened this message, and notice whether it feels even slightly lighter now. That shift, however small, is real. Carry it forward into the rest of today, and let it be the beginning of however this next season is meant to unfold for you. God says, everything you needed to hear today has now been said. What you do with it from here belongs entirely to you. Choose well. Choose today. Your plan has changed, and it is already good. Archangel Michael says, before you close this and step back into your day, take one more breath, slower than the ones before it. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Whatever tension you were holding when you found this message, release a little of it now, on purpose, rather than carrying all of it forward unchanged. You will forget most of what you read here by next week, the way most words fade with time. That is fine. You do not need to remember every sentence. You only need to remember the one feeling this left behind, the quiet sense that something is shifting, that you are not stuck the way it felt yesterday. Hold on to that feeling. Let it outlast the words that created it. God says, this is not the last message you will need. There will be harder days ahead, and easier ones too, and both are part of the same unfolding plan. When the harder days come, remember today. Remember that you were told, clearly, that the plan had changed for something better, not something worse, even when the road there looks uncertain. Your life is about to change. It already has, in ways too small to notice yet but real enough to matter. Keep walking toward it. Archangel Michael says, if you have read this far, you were meant to. Not everyone who opens a message like this stays until the end. You did. That says something about where you actually stand right now, closer to a turning point than you think, even if the evidence for it hasn't fully shown up yet. Go now. Live the next hour differently than you would have an hour ago. That is enough for today. God says, that is all for today. Carry it well.